Daniel Pipes, you're a leading scholar of the Near East and head of the Middle East Forum. You're visiting Europe now. Can you tell us what the purpose of your trip is?
I'm in Europe to participate in a conference in Budapest, and along the way I'm stopping in Berlin and Vienna to learn what's going on.
What's the conference in Budapest?
It's about migration. It's about the big key issue, and Prime Minister Orban will be one of the speakers.
Mm-hmm. Who else are you meeting in Budapest, you know?
There's some 50 speakers. It's going to be busy.
Okay. And what are you doing in Berlin now?
Well, meeting people, trying to understand a bit better the circumstances, what's going on in the CDU, the FDP, the CSU, the AFD, intellectual trends, these sort of things.
What's your impression been so far?
I've only been here a couple of days, but my theory is that what took place in Austria in December 2017 is the model for much of Europe, including Germany. So I think eventually there will be a CDU, CSU, AFD alliance that will be governing the country. So that's what I expect, and so what I'm looking at is that happening in any sense? Is there forward movement? Or is it going the reverse, or is nothing happening? Among other questions.
Have you spoken to people from the German government about this?
I have not yet, no.
You've spoken to AFD politicians?
I have, yes. But it's not just the politicians themselves, it's talking to people who are knowledgeable in this. And I think there's general agreement that that's where things are heading eventually. But it requires fundamental changes in this CDU outlook, which have not happened yet and are slow in happening. But I think eventually will happen. And I don't see anyone who fundamentally disagrees with that assessment.
As a leading American Jewish voice, what's your impression of the AFD?
My sense is that, like similar parties in other countries, it's quite new, it's quite raw, it's quite amateurish. It doesn't have experience in governing. It's learning, it's moderating, it's improving. It's only improved over the last 5-6 years, and it has a ways to go. I don't think it's quite ready for governance, but in partnership with the CDU, CSU, it could be a positive development.
What do you think of the charges of anti-Semitism leveled against the AFD?
There are certainly elements of the AFD which are. I think they're weakening. But more importantly, one has to look at the other parties. And while, for example, the CDU says all sorts of nice things, its actions are quite problematic. But I don't focus on the anti-Semitism issue. I realize it's very important. I'm a specialist on Islam, Middle East, and I'm focused on the policies towards Muslims, towards Islam, towards immigration, and so forth.
You're traveling to Vienna next. Are you meeting with the government there?
Yes, I hope to do so.
What's your impression of the new Viennese Austrian government?
Well, I went there a year ago, right after, 3-4 months after the coalition government came to office, to see what's taking place. As you can see, I think it's really important what happened in Austria. It's the model for the future, I think, of much of Europe. So I was curious what's happening. As of a few months, nothing much had happened. I'd like to return in a few days to see if a year and some months later a lot has happened. I don't have a sense that a whole lot has happened. It's a big ship to turn around. It's going to take time. It's going to be difficult. But I'll know more in a few days.
The Austrian Interior Minister Kickel announced he would rename the refugee welcome centers into deportation centers, that kind of thing.
Renaming is easy. Actually changing the policies is more difficult. I see the challenge in front of the governments that want to deal with the immigration and Islamization issues as threefold. The simplest part is to stop further immigration. If you put your mind to it, if you spend enough money, if you're determined, you can do what Salvini has done and simply say no. You can stop it. That's not hard. The second step is to remove, expel the illegal immigrants. That's difficult. Salvini, for example, said he wants to expel 500,000 illegals from Italy. Good luck. But it can be done. In fact, Israel is the leader in that. They've expelled about 40,000, or they expelled 20 of the 40,000 illegals or so. The third and most difficult challenge is what to do with the immigrant populations, especially the Muslims, who are here in the West, who are legal, who are nationals, but who resist integration, who are at odds with the prevailing order and civilization. That's the really difficult problem. And I'm fearful that that's not going to come out easily, that it's going to be problematic, it might be messy, it might be violent. That's the great challenge. And I don't think that parties like the AfD have yet begun really to think through what they would do. They know what they don't like, but they're not quite sure what to do about the problems. For example, one discussion I've had often, including with members of the AfD, is the distinction between radical Islam, Islamism, and Islam, the religion as a whole. I think it's fundamental, it's crucial. In other words, there are Muslims who are one's allies, and there are Muslims who are not. It's distinguished between. One can't just say all Muslims are alike. Indeed, the solution to Islamism, to radical Islam, lies in Reform Islam. And it's vital that we in the West understand that there are Muslims who are on our side and working with us, to accept them, to encourage them, to fund them, not just to reject Islam as a whole. It's an emotional response, but it's not a useful one. So in that way, I think there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of evolution to take place on the side of those who are concerned about this issue.
You've worked with and supported people like... what was Geert Wilders like when you first met him?
Ambitious, full of plans for the future, not very experienced at that point. Now he knows how to do things.
Can he get things done in the Netherlands?
I think it's difficult. The Conservative Party in the Netherlands at election time talks like Wilders a little bit, and then when the elections are finished, it goes back to the usual policies. Mm-hmm. So I think he's frustrated by that.
Mm-hmm. They co-opt his policies. It's kind of what Sebastian Kurz did in Austria as well, though.
Sebastian Kurz did it for real. Rupe and others don't really do it for real. They pretend to. Mm-hmm. And they would not form a government with Wilders. So, but I do think the Austrian model is the one that's coming.
There's no chance of an Austrian model in the Netherlands?
I think there is, eventually. It might be with Wilders, but it might also be with his competitor, Thierry Baudet. I don't know how it's pronounced in Dutch, who has founded the Forum for Democracy, which is also competing for this anti-immigration, anti-Islamization vote.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get involved with Tommy Robinson?
Well, I met him in late 2017. He took me to Luton, his hometown, introduced me to some people, we chatted. And then in May of 2018, I saw that when he was suddenly put in jail, there were some 500,000 signatures on a petition that he be released. And my view of Britain is that it's the most laggard country, the most slow-moving country in Europe. it's the one major country where there really is not a party dealing with the immigration and Islamization issues. So I saw this as a potential moment of change to build on that. And so the Middle East Forum's project the legal project that deals with people get in trouble because of what they say or think about Islam, we funded 3 street demonstrations in London. It's not what we usually do, you know, stages and microphones and things like that, in May and July and October of 2018. And I think it was money well spent. He has emerged as a more serious person and as a serious figure in British political life. He's still raw in many ways, makes mistakes, but I think his problem is going to be put in jail and the like helped him mature and become a more significant figure.
Tommy Robinson's involvement with UKIP led Nigel Farage to leave the party and found his own party. What do you think of that split?
Well, I think it's inevitable that parties and websites and other phenomena that start out dealing with the economy or start out dealing with splitting Belgium or splitting Italy drop those other concerns and focus on immigration and Islamization, which is the existential threat to Europe. So you get started like the True Finns on the economy or UKIP on Brexit, but eventually you turn to this, or AFD on the economy, because this is the issue where the passions are highest and the stakes are most important. And Nigel Farage refused to make that transition. We could speculate about his reasons, but he refused that. But his successor, Gerald Batten, said, yeah, I want to make that transition, and Tommy Robinson will be someone who's going to help me do that. And Farage, furious, and quit the party, as you said, create his own party. But I don't think that's where the future is. I think the future is in having a party that directly deals with these key issues of immigration and Islamization. There's also another small party, For Britain, started by Anne-Marie Waters, which is attempting to deal with the same ground. I don't know who's going to prevail in the end. It's hard to predict these sort of things. But I'm glad to see that these parties are emerging in Britain and elsewhere because they're disruptive. They change the discussion. They're necessary. Where you don't have a party like that, you don't have a real serious discussion of the issues.
How do people in Israel see the new right parties in Europe? Are they worried, or do they see an opportunity?
In Israel, there's a division, as symbolized by the president of the country, Rivlin, who doesn't want anything to do with, say, Salvini. He went to Israel, and Rivlin didn't see him. And on the other hand, Netanyahu, the prime minister, welcomed him and met him and talked to him. So basically, more to the right is more friendly, more to the left is less friendly. Should Netanyahu be reelected, he will continue to want to deal with, in particular, the FPÖ, and particularly the foreign minister, Knisel. But if Gantz wins, I doubt that will be the case. So it's essentially on a right-left spectrum, the views on the parties in Europe focused on Islamization and immigration, as it is everywhere.
What can the new right parties in Europe do to court the Israeli favor?
I think the most important thing is to purge the anti-Semitic elements. They already have policies that are friendly to Israel, like wanting to move the embassy to Jerusalem, being against the Iran deal. But it's the presence of these loud, unpleasant anti-Semitic voices that gives the opponents of these parties the strongest argument to reject them. And it's not just in Israel, it's not just Jews, it's more wide than that. It's this, I think, is the single most delegitimating aspect of the new, what I call civilizationalist parties, parties that are focused on on retaining Western civilization.
The argument of the charge of anti-Semitism, you mean, that's used against the parties?
Exactly, yeah. That is the most potent argument, the most efficient way of delegitimating them. And so they need to get their act together on that if they want to get forward. And you can see there has been progress. Perhaps the most dramatic development was in 2015 when Marine Le Pen threw her father out of the party that he had co-founded in 1973, 42 years earlier, because he was still engaged in these anti-Semitic statements. Very important.
Heinz-Christian Strache from the FPÖ visited Israel, I think, in 2010, but he couldn't get any official appointments. He couldn't get anyone from the government to talk to him. How can one do that?
He's been back to Israel, and he still hasn't had official appointments. No, the Israeli government has not had relations with him or Knisel or others. But I think Netanyahu wants to. The problem is, one, that others in Israel don't want to, like Rivlin, the president, and two, perhaps more important, the local Jewish committee, no matter how small, I think it's 15,000 people in Austria, are completely against it, or at least the officialdom is completely against it. And so it's a matter of either changing the leadership in Austria or the Israelis determining it's in their national interest, because they need to have good relations. These are Hungary and Austria stand out as the two states in Europe that are protecting Israel's interests. Also Cyprus and Greece now. Israel needs them. Raison d'etat requires good relations with these governments. So I think it's a matter of time. I think it's also incumbent upon the civilizationalist parties to get their act together. And FPÖ was founded by an ex-Nazi. Okay, that's in the past. The Sweden Democrats had very fascistic elements in the 1980s. Fine. Push it away completely and start afresh and get rid of these voices. They do enormous harm to the parties.
Mm-hmm. Berlin became a very popular destination among Israelis. People moved here, the prices were much better, and now Israelis and Jews have been complaining that Germany is changing. What do you think led to that development, 2015? Why did the German government act the way it did?
Well, I think there's a lot of mystery as to what exactly Merkel was up to. Was it meeting that Palestinian girl? Was it something more planned, or was it spontaneous? Not quite clear what happened. Was it making up in some ways for German history? A lot of different levels of explanation. I can't tell a German audience what happened. But I do think it was a world historical moment, to quote Hegel. It was a very major event that will have repercussions far and wide throughout Europe for many years to come. It took an existing situation and exacerbated it and made it far more immediate and important and urgent than it had been. So we're still seeing the consequences of that massive immigration. I mean, those pictures of people walking through the Balkans, that had a deep impact throughout the continent.
What do you see the future of Europe as?
There are three. My focus is on immigration and Islamization. There are, of course, many other issues of great importance. But this is the one I would argue that is the most important, that is the threat to Europe's continued existence as a civilization it has been for, say, the last millennium. And there are three different ways of approaching this question. One is to say, it'll work out. People will find a commonality, they'll muddle through. That is the default position of most politicians and intellectuals. It'll work out. I don't think there's any chance of that. And so among those who are like me, pessimistic that it'll all work out, there are two positions. One is to say, Europe is finished. The common term is Eurabia. Or to put it slightly differently, that Europe will become an extension of North Africa. You'll see the Sharia, you'll see mosques, you'll see increased numbers of Muslims. And what happened in North Africa was Christian North Africa at one point. It became Muslim North Africa. Christian Europe will become Muslim Europe. There are some prominent voices that advocate that, like Arianna Fallaci, the late Italian writer, Bache Orr, Swiss writer, Mark Stein, the Canadian author, who say it's inevitable, it's finished, Europe is done. The trend lines are there and impossible to stop. I disagree. That is the main view among those who are concerned. The minority view is the one I subscribe to, which is that Europeans are saying enough, we don't want more of this, and they're going to stop it. Indigenous Europeans are still 95% of the population. If they want something, they'll get it. And I see now, in 2019, early 2019, 5 countries that are changing their policies towards immigration and Islamization. Poland, Czechia, Hungary, Austria, and Italy. We're weeks away from the Spanish elections. I think there'll be a change there as well. That'll be the 6th country. There are 3 other countries in which what I call civilizationalist parties are part of the government, but not very effective, in Switzerland and Slovakia and in Norway. One of these days they might wake up. And I can see in the future, I can see the Austrian model occurring, for example, in Germany, in Sweden, and elsewhere. And I predict that within 20 years, all of Europe will have some form or other of government that is dealing in a direct way with immigration and Islamization. And there are three ways in which that can happen. One is, as in Hungary, totally taking over. That's the only power there is. But I have a hard time seeing that happen in many other places. And the second is the Austrian model of a joint government with the civilizationalist and the Conservative Party. And I think that's going to be widespread. And the third is the more exotic and surprising joint government in Italy of the League and the Five Star, which is a leftist, anarchist party. It's a little difficult to describe what it is, but it's certainly not conservative. That is possible too. One can imagine that taking place. One can imagine that something like the Aufstehen movement in Germany will also take place. One can see it in Denmark in particular. One can imagine it elsewhere. In France, Mélenchon has elements in common. He doesn't want immigration. In Britain, Corbyn has... in other words, the left has historically been in favor of free movement and high immigration. And these 3 elements in Germany, France, and Britain are saying, well, not so sure. On the left, from the left, could be very important in the future. Mm-hmm. So we're at the beginning of a long story. Mm-hmm. We're just getting started.
Thank you.